Consider this scenario. A corporation valued at nearly $2 trillion evaluated Chicago, a metropolitan area of almost 3 million residents sitting atop the nation's third largest economy, and made a definitive decision to withdraw entirely. Not to negotiate, not to scale back operations, complete exit. Yet when the city's leadership addressed this publicly, they didn't ask why. They didn't engage in self-reflection. Instead, they erupted in blame. They pointed fingers at corporate greed, at capitalism itself, everywhere except the policies that created the conditions for this departure in the first place. This isn't an isolated incident. What's unfolding in Chicago right now is a warning for every American city, and it's accelerating. I'm breaking down a story that mainstream outlets are working overtime to reframe and minimize. This isn't just business news, it's a critical economic warning. What's happening in Chicago represents a 5-alarm crisis, not a minor adjustment. Political leaders are downplaying the severity, but we're going to examine the full picture. Before we proceed, I need your perspective. If you're in Illinois or Chicago, I'm asking directly, has your situation improved or deteriorated over the past 5 years? Your job prospects, your neighborhood, your daily reality, I'm listening. Drop your experience in the comments. On this channel, we investigate the economic and political forces that powerful institutions hope you won't scrutinize. We follow the evidence. We analyze the data. We communicate the reality, regardless of whether it aligns with official narratives or challenges political messaging. When the facts are uncomfortable or contradict established talking points, we present them anyway. If you haven't subscribed, do it now. Hit the notification bell. Here's what matters. I'm closely monitoring Amazon's Chicago situation and tracking a dozen other major corporations actively considering exits from blue state cities. The subsequent video in this investigation will identify specific companies, concrete numbers, and policy decisions that will make today's analysis look like an opening preview. This is essential viewing. Subscribe, enable notifications, and let's examine this thoroughly. Chicago has a legacy. For generations, it stood as the economic heart of the American Midwest. During the post-war expansion era of the 1950s and 60s, Chicago was an industrial powerhouse. Manufacturing facilities lined the waterfront. Processing plants operated at unprecedented scale. Financial markets headquartered here influenced commerce across the entire nation. This was a city that produced tangible goods, a city that created employment, a city that compensated working people with wages that built families and communities. By the 1990s and entering the 2000s, Chicago executed a strategic transition. Manufacturing was shifting globally, so the city repositioned itself as a financial and distribution nexus. O'Hare became one of the world's premier airports. Geographic positioning created natural advantages for logistics operations. Major corporations, Boeing among them, one of American industry's most prestigious names, relocated their central operations to Chicago. Fortune 500 enterprises were actively establishing themselves. Financial firms, technology companies, strategic consulting organizations. Chicago was the destination. And temporarily, it worked. The skyline expanded. The revenue base grew. Previously abandoned industrial neighborhoods, the West Loop, River North, transformed into dynamic, economically vibrant communities. Talented professionals were relocating there. Capital was flowing in. The city was delivering results. But somewhere between those prosperous years and today, the trajectory reversed. Strategic choices were implemented, deliberate political and policy decisions that systematically dismantled what had been constructed. Amazon's exit represents the most dramatic symptom, but the underlying disease has been progressing for years. The mayor's public reaction focuses on the wrong target entirely. Let's examine the data. Chicago has experienced the most significant resident departure of any major U.S. city during the past decade. We're discussing a population decrease exceeding 100,000 residents since 2010, according to census information. Consider that magnitude. That's not a marginal statistical variance. That represents an entire mid-size American city, equivalent to Peoria, Surprise, Coral Springs, evacuated from Chicago's economic structure. People didn't leave voluntarily. They were forced out by escalating expenses, by safety concerns, by deteriorating services, and critically, by an employment market that's systematically contracting. Regarding corporate relocations, Boeing transferred its global operations from Chicago to Virginia in 2022 after anchoring itself there for 2 decades, determining the operational context had become untenable. Caterpillar, an American industrial institution established in 1925 and synonymous with Illinois manufacturing, relocated its headquarters to Texas in 2022. Citadel, a major Wall Street investment firm with billions under management, moved from Chicago to Miami in 2022. The CEO explicitly identified crime, political atmosphere, and trajectory concerns. Now Amazon, essentially synonymous with modern commerce, is systematically dismantling its Chicago operations entirely. This represents far more than closing individual facilities. It's a comprehensive operational withdrawal. Fulfillment centers disappearing, distribution networks shutting down, the entire economic network connected to an Amazon presence vanishing. Economic research demonstrates that each direct logistics position supports roughly 1.5 to 2 additional positions within the surrounding community. When we're discussing hundreds or potentially thousands of direct Amazon positions exiting Chicago, we're calculating a cascading effect that devastates local communities in ways individual headlines never capture. This isn't corporate restructuring, it's community devastation. Illinois imposes a 9.5% corporate tax rate, among the nation's highest. Texas charges 0%. That comparison isn't subtle, it's an economic signal. Illinois's cumulative tax burden, property taxes, personal income taxes, business taxes combined, ranks among America's 5 heaviest. You're financing more while receiving less, while observing the corporations providing jobs that generate tax revenue departing. The pattern is transparent. Commercial property taxation in Chicago specifically reflects some of America's most elevated rates, escalating consistently as municipal leadership attempts addressing pension deficits. Economic analysis indicates commercial property taxes in Chicago's logistics zones have climbed over 30% in merely 1 decade. Furthermore, Illinois has implemented various labor regulations, wage requirements, and workplace mandates that individually might appear reasonable, but cumulatively create operational costs, rendering thin-margin logistics operations fundamentally unworkable. Industry professionals characterize Illinois' regulatory compliance burden as a permanent tax on conducting business that never materializes in standard tax calculations. Chicago's pension obligations create a slow-motion fiscal catastrophe. Teacher pensions, police pensions, firefighter pensions, and municipal employee pensions collectively represent over $30 billion in unfunded liabilities. Annually, these obligations expand faster than incoming tax revenue. Specialists have communicated alarm repeatedly for over 10 years. The response? Political postponement, tax increases to bridge shortfalls, driving additional business departures, shrinking the revenue base, intensifying the shortfall. This represents what fiscal destruction resembles from within. Meanwhile, crime statistics have deteriorated to the point they've become cultural shorthand for urban dysfunction. The city documents over 600 annual homicides. Major retailers, Walmart, Whole Foods, Starbucks, have shuttered Chicago locations in recent years, specifically citing organized theft, safety challenges, and operational unprofitability. Consider this. If Whole Foods and Starbucks, corporations with substantial capital and advanced logistics, cannot sustain operations, what signal does that communicate to Amazon operating on minimal retail margins? The dominoes are cascading. Meet Marcus. Not his actual name, but his situation is genuine. He's 38, raised on Chicago's South Side. His father performed logistics work, warehouse operations, loading facilities. Marcus followed the same path, obtained certifications, developed expertise over 15 years, earning $62,000 annually. Not affluent, but sufficient for a respectable residence, supporting his mother, considering future possibilities. When Amazon expanded into Chicago's logistics sector, Marcus became a floor supervisor at a fulfillment center. It represented his finest professional opportunity. Then the withdrawal commenced, initially rumors, subsequently reduced scheduling, then the announcement. Marcus wasn't terminated. Relocation to Tennessee was offered, but Marcus's existence is rooted in Chicago, his family, his community, his entire life framework. Relocating represents destroying everything he's established. Instead, Marcus competes within Chicago's contracting employment sector, competing against displaced workers for shrinking positions. Employers inform him his market valuation has collapsed to $48,000, $52,000, a $10,000+ reduction because Amazon's wage-setting influence has evaporated. The consequences extended further. A Vietnamese-owned restaurant 2 blocks away, constructed around lunch and dinner traffic from Amazon employees, experienced 40% revenue collapse immediately. The commercial landlord managing the surrounding businesses now confronts multiple vacant properties. A child care facility expanded specifically for Amazon shift workers now faces financial stress threatening closure. One corporate decision cascades outward like fracturing ice, impacting Marcus, his mother, the restaurant operator, child care providers, landlords, every connection in a community's economic fabric. Amazon didn't depart Chicago because of inherent corporate malice. Amazon departed because deliberate policy decisions rendered Chicago an economically irrational location for operations. That distinction is crucial. The political timeline is traceable. 2011 income tax increase. Pension reforms that weren't. 2019 wage escalation schedules. Property tax increases funding pension deficits created by earlier decisions. Each represented a deliberate choice by elected representatives elected specifically because voters believed these policies would assist workers and communities. Instead, workers are losing employment. Communities are losing anchors. Politicians responsible for these choices are performing public outrage at departing corporations rather than acknowledging their own policy contributions. If you established a store, priced merchandise beyond customer affordability, then blamed customers for shopping elsewhere, would anyone sympathize? That's precisely Chicago's situation. And when Amazon's departure became public, Mayor Brandon Johnson performed the predictable response, manufacturing outrage toward the corporation rather than demonstrating accountability for his policy environment. This communicates to every American CEO, we will assign responsibility to you for our policy consequences. Rational corporate decision-makers comprehend that message clearly. They respond accordingly. Meanwhile, Texas just secured a substantial Amazon logistics campus in the Dallas-Fort Worth region. Thousands of positions, hundreds of millions in infrastructure investment, long-term economic stability for surrounding areas. They're acquiring not merely positions, but supplier agreements, secondary employment, property appreciation, tax revenue supporting infrastructure without devastating existing residents. Florida attracted over 300,000 net new residents in a single recent year, many originating from Illinois, New York, California. These relocations aren't primarily retirees, but working professionals, entrepreneurs, and business operators making deliberate decisions about where to construct economic lives. Companies are following. Citadel moved to Miami. Oracle chose Texas. Tesla established in Texas. HP Enterprise relocated to Texas. These aren't coincidental movements. Rational actors responding to rational incentives created by deliberate policy decisions. Texas and Florida didn't accidentally become relocation winners. They made choices, maintained lower taxation, sustained business-friendly regulatory environments, treated corporate investment as advantageous rather than problematic. Results are measurable, undeniable, and intensifying. Perhaps you don't inhabit Chicago. Maybe you're in Atlanta, Phoenix, or a mid-sized city appearing economically stable. This analysis applies universally. This narrative transcends Chicago. What's advancing through Chicago represents an advanced condition of disease already exhibiting initial symptoms in communities nationwide. Detroit experienced this first, written off as manufacturing-specific, exceptional, not a template. San Francisco followed, hemorrhaging retail operations, major employers, downtown vacancy rates surpassing previous predictions. Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis experienced similar deterioration. Chicago represents the loudest, most unmistakable current example, but not the ultimate one. This indicates a fundamental geographic reorganization of American economic possibility. Historically, major cities, dense, interconnected, culturally sophisticated, represented opportunity destinations. Career building required urban relocation. Business expansion demanded metropolitan positioning. That presumption is disintegrating as policy accumulation in major metros deteriorates attractiveness. Here's my prediction. Chicago's current trajectory will replicate in every city following identical policy pathways. Corporate withdrawals, population loss, fiscal death spirals, political reactions blaming external factors rather than internal policy. These aren't Chicago-exclusive consequences. They're predictable outcomes from specific policy frameworks. If your city is presently raising business taxation to address pension shortfalls, if your leadership publicly opposes corporate investment, if departing residents are attributed to factors beyond policy decisions, observe carefully. You're witnessing the advancing chapters of Chicago's later stage experience. 3 essential understandings. First, Amazon's Chicago departure represents rational response to an economic context shaped by decades of decisions prioritizing political image-making over economic functionality. Businesses aren't culprits, policies are. Second, this isn't Chicago's inevitable destiny. Decline never occurs automatically. It stems from decisions, and decisions can transform. Indianapolis, Columbus, Nashville have reversed trajectories through leadership willing to discuss what builds economic strength versus what dismantles it. Third, you possess influence. Your participation matters, your contribution matters, your consciousness matters, because politicians implementing these decisions depend on you being occupied, distracted, or resigned to overlook connections between implemented policies and resulting economic circumstances. The instant you establish those connections explicitly and refuse political reframing, the instant you become an informed, questioning voter demanding substantive responses, incentive structures for politicians shift. Decline isn't predetermined. It results from decisions, and decisions can be reversed. I require your authentic perspective in the comments. If you inhabit Chicago or Illinois, communicate your experience. Share businesses you've observed closing. Discuss disappearing positions. Describe the moment you contemplated departure. Your narrative carries significance. If this examination altered your perspective, if it communicated understanding the evening news provides differently, engage the like function. It signals YouTube this information merits distribution and helps circulate this material to individuals requiring it. Subscribe to this channel for additional economic and political investigations reshaping America, while institutional media diverts attention. Weekly, we analyze financial data, examine evidence, and communicate reality rather than manufactured narratives. I'm tracking this situation intently. Amazon's Chicago withdrawal represents an initial wave. Subsequent investigations will expose the comprehensive scope developing, additional cities approaching critical points, corporations performing calculations currently, political decisions capable of altering trajectories if accountability mechanisms function properly. This is essential viewing. Subscribe, activate notifications, distribute this content with individuals who require exposure. Stay informed, stay engaged, perpetually question. I'll connect with you next time.